It's Jamie Barron, it's opening up for him, it's really a good chance, it's a great chance, and he scored! Walsh was in difficulty, here's a chance for Shanahan! Maurice Shanahan!
Into the middle, Jamie Barron is here, what's going to happen? Goal for Waterford! Waterford are in the All-Ireland final for the first time since 2008. Kieran Kingston sportingly congratulates Derek McGrath. He has guided the Deise to an All-Ireland final.
So for the second week in a row, I'm happy to say, I am joined by Derek McGrath. Derek, welcome back.
How are you keeping? Grant, good to be back, thank you.
The commentary went well last week. It was a great reception. It was good. You enjoyed it, yeah?
Yeah, it was actually different. It was actually my first, well, not my first co-com, but my first experience of it at local level in terms of co-commentary. I did a bit of co-commentary on the Fitzgibbon with Oisin Langan before, so yeah, really enjoyed it. Good dynamic there with Kieran is obviously a pro, been at it since 91, 92. I think the irony of it is, I think that I might be right, the first match he did, I think, was actually the All-Ireland minor semi-final between ourselves and Antrim. I was playing myself that day, so yeah, I would have heard Kieran commentate at social level. My dad would have heard him a couple of nights before that particular match, if you like, a few times in a run-up to that. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Obviously, when you're led well by a pro, it helps.
He didn't try and bully you, no? He didn't try and tell you what's what?
No. I think that's the interesting thing about it. I think that's the good dynamic. If someone has a diverse opinion or a different opinion, or you're not afraid to give it, and I think that makes for a good kind of good balance to the commentary in terms of what Ballygunner were doing or what Fourmile Water were doing. It was obviously a bit of a gulf in terms of the overall class element between the two teams, but it's still, you're still cognizant of a team that's absolutely trying its absolute best in Fourmile Water. So I think there's balance needed in your approach, and I think that's achievable, in terms of the dynamic of the pair working on it.
Yeah. So with the results last weekend, we'll just have a touch off them before we look at this weekend. Passage, Ballygunner, Mount Sion and Lismore. You're 2 out of 4. You weren't too far off.
Yeah, I'd say I wasn't on my own predicting that Rowan and De La Salle would probably win. I'd say a lot of potential accumulators suffered as a result of so-called expert punditry, if you like, or tips. But yeah, look, I think that was the statisticians or guys involved in the whole area of actuary, and would probably have gone with De La Salle to beat Mount Sion and Rowan Moore to beat Passage. But yeah, look, the first game, the Passage Rowan Moore, very interesting in that I just felt Rowan Moore could never get their game going. It was a poor game to watch, if you like, and that doesn't take from the merits of the victory on Passage's behalf or the manner in which they kind of fought, if you like, valiantly. And I think that will probably suit them coming in. I think I mentioned last week that there's a couple of things that have suited Passage this year, in that expectation has definitely lowered given the unavailability or retirement of the likes of Pa Welch or Thomas Connors. That's helped. So therefore they've kind of put their faith in youth. So you have the likes of Mikey Cummins coming into the team. You have a kind of an injection of youth. You have kind of a return of Owen Connors, and from a perception point of view, that helps in terms of the outside expectation. And Michael Walsh has obviously turned the screw on that. So what they have is they've based their performances on what's been evident in Passage all the years, which is just an intangible spirit and a togetherness and unity. And it goes to show that can defy logic at times, and it definitely did defy logic. Whereas Rowan Moore were just disappointed that they didn't get their game going. They were really impressive against Mount Sion, really impressive on the challenge match circuit, but underperformed on the biggest day of all. So they'll be hurting over that, but I don't think there's a need to kind of rip up the script altogether in Rowan Moore. I think they have lots of good players, and they're just a bad day at the office, and anyone can have that, as we know ourselves in De La Salle on Sunday last.
But even you're saying with a bad day at the office, it's only 4 points in it. Like, it's not exactly they didn't get thumped.
And look, I think they felt there was periods of the game where they just, as I said, the flow of the game and the nature, the conditions, and Passage's valiant kind of fight, if you like, kind of interrupted their flow. And I think Passage were full value for it, to be fair. Passage were full value for it, and they didn't get thumped. And look, they'll reassess how they got to the quarter-final, how they played in the run-up to it, and no doubt Peter will be at the helm there again next year to fix it, if you like, and to right the wrongs of it. But it's you often see not an overreaction within club situations, that it's kind of almost Premiership-like now, in terms of when a team underperforms on a given day, there's sure, look, this is to blame or that's to blame, and the reality can be just sport is the vagaries of sport enable for there to be kind of not, the outcome is never kind of absolutely certain in any realms of sport, if you like, and I think that's the case in both the Passage Rowan Moore game last week and the De La Salle Mount Sion game. You have a team can be right up and at it, and the other team needs to match it at least to perform.
We'll come back to we'll skip past Ballygunner and former Waters. We'll talk about Ballygunner in a second. Well, can you talk about Mount Sinai and Deise for a second? Now, I would love to put you on commentary for that one last weekend because it's been great crack, but reality is we just can't. Tough enough one to swallow, I suppose.
Yeah, if it was on commentary, it'd be very hard to speak on it. Sometimes you can be caught speechless. But yeah, look, I was openly purporting to kind of claim that I suppose that Deise would have a really good chance of the team that would tackle Ballygunner, that had the best chance of tackling Ballygunner. I would stand over that in terms of what I'd seen in terms of Deise. So the lads would be disappointed with how we played. But I think more so than anything, the credit really has to go to Mount Sinai. First of all, I think to the management team. John Meany has been involved, I think, for the last 2 years, and there's been a significant improvement in Mount Sinai and how they've gone about their business over those particular years. There seems to be a real connection between himself. I know Austin's uncle Darren is part of the backroom team, their management team, and seems to be a real connection between the leaders of their team and John Meany and his squad. I know they have Ger Cunningham, who's been involved with the Laois seniors under Cheddar Plunkett and was involved in Thurles Sarsfields previously, helping there as well, and he's a really, really well-renowned coach. And they've also, some of the hierarchy of Mount Sinai in terms of Jim Green, I see him involved on the sideline as well. So they've kind of got the mix right, I'd say, from a management perspective between, traditional kind of Mount Sinai winners, if you like, and a kind of maybe an influx of new injection of opinion as well there that would kind of coincide with how they're playing. Plus, and it's actually, I was on another podcast with Pádraig Fanning where he actually kind of just mentioned the fact that Mount Sinai had been beaten in 2 minor A finals by Ballygunner by the minimum scores, and sometimes then we tend to ignore the influence that Jamie Gleeson could have, or PJ Fanning could have, or guys that are new to the squad, that are Evan McGrath of this world, that perhaps we wouldn't kind of propel up to the highest echelons when we're talking about fellas. But you combine those with Stephen Roach, Martin O'Neill, Martin Fish O'Neill, Owen Whelan, Stephen O'Neill, and then Austin himself, of course, and you have a very, very experienced team. Even Michael Gaffney rolling back the years there last Sunday, kind of. And then you add that to the tradition that they have, the 35 county titles, and the tradition of players they've produced, and therefore you mightn't be as surprised as others. So you'd have to give credit for how they went about their business and how they are going about their business, and again they'll relish the chance to take down passage on Saturday or Sunday next.
Before we get to this weekend's games, Lismore and Abbeyside. Lismore dynamite at the moment for scoring points. Like the Shanahans, in fairness, like Dan's come off the bench a couple of times. Morris, we said it last weekend, like he's playing serious stuff. In general, like look, they've a serious game against them at Ballygunner, but that performance last weekend was pretty strong, in fairness though. Yeah,
and I think they were right at it from the start. And the very interesting thing, as I think we previewed last week, was the likely matchup between Conor Prunty and Morris, and that materialised. And the first 15-16 minutes of the game, I thought Conor was really, really on top, visibly out in front, noticeably out in front, winning ball, attacking. I thought Morris did something really, really clever then. He actually went to the right corner with Conor Prunty, just drifted right into the right corner of his own attack. And at that stage, Jack Pender, Oisin O'Gorman, Cormac Daly was getting forward from the middle of the field, Finbarrini, all their other forwards were really, really prominent in terms of their play, and I thought it was great game management on Matt Morris's behalf. He was nearly taking Prunty away from setting up attacks, etc. And then Morris had an offload to someone for a point, I think could have been Jordan Shannon, and then he got a point from play himself, and then the battle kind of started to turn. His confidence, you could see him growing in stature, and the beginning of the second half he nipped a couple of points off Conor as well. And then Abbeyside obviously bit the bullet. Then they kind of said to themselves, right, we need Conor to kind of drive us going forward, and they took him away from kind of the man marking duties of Morris, and then Morris added a goal and another point onto it. So I think Morris showed his credentials in terms of being able to deal with the 16 or 17 minutes of Prunty at the top of his game, and then turning the screw on Conor almost as the game wore on, and then eventually obviously escaping the shackles of Conor altogether. So I thought that was interesting to watch Lismore perform whilst Conor had him under the shackles and still being able to kind of flow. And also based on the game they played previously against Dungarvan, there was a noticeable tightening in their defensive kind of realm. So Irla was really tight on Neil Montgomery, and yet he was able to sweep up as well, because he had Jack Pender only outside him when he'd win ball. and David Pender was really tight and John Pender. So there was kind of a noticeable kind of tightening of their defence based on, I say, a week of analysis between the Abbeyside game and the Dungarvan game. So Lismore, hugely impressive.
We'll continue with them for a second. What way do they approach Ballygunner? How do you beat this Ballygunner side?
Well, psychologically, there has to be freedom in it to a certain extent. You'd be trying to put your manager's hat on here in that, and people will say, well, listen to that and say, how do you mean freedom? What I mean by is they've never beaten Ballygunner in Championship hurling, so that brings a certain freedom, ironically, because the expectation levels are that Ballygunner will win. Again, if you go into a bookies, I'd imagine Ballygunner are probably money on to win the game. So from an approach point of view, in terms of the management and players, I won't say it's a free hit, but it certainly it is an opportunity to kind of go after Ballygunner, if you like. So I think that's the approach they'll take. I'd imagine they'll try, if you go to the kind of potential matchups, you may see Barry Coughlin tail Morris for the whole hour, if you like, or the whole 70 minutes, and you have a similar situation to what happened with Conor Prunty. So you'd be hoping that if that materialises, that you'll have a situation where the Jack Penders and the Oisin O'Gormans, etc., can keep their form flowing as it was last week, the Paddy Penders, that they can keep their form flowing. So I think they'll approach it in a manner where the confidence kind of gained from the two games previous is still kind of inculcated into their own mindset, and I think that will help them in their approach. And they'll be looking to target a good start, even section off the game into the first 15 minutes and say, this is where we're going to go about it for the first 15 minutes. You looked last week when Ballygunner, after the first water break, Deise Hutchinson gets the goal just initially after, and you kind of almost kind of say to yourself, even in commentary, without wanting to come across as negative, you nearly say in your own mind, game over here, because they'll just tack on a couple of points, and before you know it, they're 8 or 9 points down. So Lismore's best fluency is when they attack and go ahead and keep attacking. So I think the nature of the game, they know, should be to go after them, attack without being unbelievably stupid or naive at the back as well. But that's a fine balancing act when you play a really good team.
So for Ballygunner, in that matchup, do they just do what they do, as in every week they go out and they turn up and they play well and they win, or do they have to adjust to play this more, or do they play their own game?
I think they play their own game, but I think in the midst of playing their own game, they mightn't acknowledge it publicly, but they do plan specifically for the oppositions that they're playing. So they'll obviously do their video analysis around certain key players in the Lismore setup. I'd imagine that Morris will be centre of that. You'd imagine that because of Oisin O'Gorman's 1-3 or 1-4, does Ian Kenny come from one corner to the other corner to pick up Oisin O'Gorman? Does that materialise? If Morris goes to centre forward, is it a case that Paddy Levy then will pick Morris at centre forward and leave Philip to sit, because Philip Manny was kind of sitting in the pocket? They kind of are able to manipulate a situation where Philip is nearly free for all the games, and will it be a case where Morris pushes right up on Philip, almost putting the pressure on Philip, and if that's the case, does Barry pick him and does Philip find another way of being free, which is what Ballygunner have done in the past? So that for me is the interesting. But I think, I was just watching the warm-ups last week when we were on the commentary, and you're looking for an angle psychologically in terms of how Ballygunner are preparing, maybe different for everybody, different to everyone. But I just overheard them kind of talking in their huddle, and just when you're there, and there's not many there these days, you can obviously kind of hear a little bit more, and they're just talking about standards. I heard the word standards kind of just been mentioned a couple of times by their key leaders, and just not leaving their standards drop for a second. So I think, whilst we sit back and we kind of often refer to the fact that Ballygunner are in cruise control and they're in third gear and they've another couple of gears, it might be lazy kind of analysis in that. I think what they do is they just insist on the highest of standards throughout the game, and then they look up at the scoreboard at the end of it, and invariably they're ahead. So I think that's what they're doing at the moment. They're really focusing on the nitty gritty processes involved in getting a performance, and I think they're about standards, hooks, blocks, turnovers, and using the ball well, if you like. And that's a part of their whole process, and I think they'll just probably go about their business in the manner that they've done up to this, and up to for the last 36 games, and a 4 in a row in the minor there on Wednesday night, and potential superstars to come into their team over the next couple of years. So it mightn't get any easier.
I'll come back to you in a second for predictions, right? We'll that at the end, but we'll go to Sunday then for a second, and Mount Sion and Passage. Now it's an early game, 2 o'clock in Welch Park. Might break our heart, but we'll start with Mount Sion, considering what happened last weekend. Give me your take on Mount Sion for this game.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in that the dynamic completely changes now, in that Mount Sion, following a fairly comprehensive defeat at the hands of Rome Moore, were in many eyes, my own included, kind of, I thought De La Salle would beat them. So now it's reversed. I'd imagine, certainly I'm not sure about the bookies' odds on it, but I'd imagine Mount Sion are favourites for the game against Passage. The general perception would be that Passage have not overperformed, really performed really well, and the words bonus territory, whilst they won't be used in the Passage dressing room, could be applicable to their overall season, given how many people they've lost and how they've performed nearly above themselves, if you like, and ably led by Noel Connors, brilliant in his performance last weekend. But so Mount Sion, the table has turned in terms of favouritism. Traditionally they've lived very well with that tag, and again I think they're a team that are, that they're working so hard, their forward line are working so hard in terms of their hooks, blocks and tackles, and how hard they're working around the field, that they will go into the game again kind of with no eye on the county final, with just an eye on what's in front of them in terms of Passage, and they'll know that traditionally Passage would bring fight and would bring kind of doggedness and have a lot of good hurlers as well. So I think it's a different dynamic from Mount Sion, but I think they'll approach with real earnest kind of seriousness, and they have lots of good players, and on the overall balance, I'd expect Mount Sion to be kind of, without giving a prediction, you'd expect Mount Sion to be kind of in the final come Sunday afternoon.
What can Passage do to stop that happening?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult. If you go to the couple of games that they've played thus far against Ballygunner, because of the opposition that they were playing in terms of the forward line that they were playing, they played Darragh Lynch as a sweeper, so they played a 7 defender. They looked to kind of lock it up. That rebounded on them in terms of Ballygunner, the overall approach. Last week it was kind of a mix and match at times against Roamore, because Roamore were playing with Sean Burke as a 7 defender. Invariably Passage had an extra defender then, and they were able to kind of lock it up a little bit better, and Noel and Callum and Darragh Lynch and these guys were combining really well at the back, and they had numbers at the back. So it's mix and match. Do they approach it? Mount Sion will play not conventionally, but you'll have a situation where Owen Whelan will sit. Fish O'Neill played at wing back last week. Will he sit as well? And Austin is deep from centre forward. He's named at centre forward, but he plays anywhere else bar centre forward. So invariably you nearly have a defensive advantage at each team. So Passage may go with that. May have a situation where they won't leave one of their, obviously we'll have to tag Austin, but they might leave one of their wing backs or even their midfielders sit in from the middle of the field and try and pick them off early from out the field. But look, they're all secondary to kind of work rate being the catalyst for good performances. So I think that's what Passage will try and do. They'll try and maybe stop the leaking of goals. De La Salle were going well, and all of a sudden then Austin pops up, he throws one into to Alan Kerwin, it's hung in the net. Stephen Roach gets one. The goals are kind of killer. So the concession of easy, cheap scores might be at the forefront of their mind early on, particularly in Welsh Park, where it's that little bit tighter environs, and it's easier probably keep the whole thing tight, and I think Passage will be hoping to do that.
As I said, we'll come back to predictions in a second. We'll just touch off the intermediate finals for a second. Clashmore, Kinsale-Beg and Ballyduff Upper.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest bonus from a Waterford perspective is that Tig is back hurling with Clashmore and hurling really well. I think that I'd obviously be trying to keep an eye on how he's going and how well he's going, and I think the very first match almost 8-9 weeks ago, I think he actually played a junior match against Abbeyside, and he was just trying to feel his way into it, and then against Ring he was trying to feel his way into it in the very, very first time they played Ring, and then obviously he'd played really well against Medeligo and Capricorn, right back to his form, sitting right on the edge of the D, marking where necessary, but more often than that reading and setting up play. And the form of Brian O'Halloran has been noticed, but as well in that, fresh from a sojourn out of the county setup, often a guy gets a real kind of lift from being away from the county setup, believe it or not, that he feels real refreshed, not under the burden of the county setup, if you like, and he's played really well. So it's interesting that Clashmore, beaten comprehensively by Ring in the first round, are now back in the final. Ballyduff's story is a different story in that they've obviously relegated from the senior ranks for the first time in a long time last year, and there's kind of obviously they're kind of rejuvenated now and back playing really well. Mikey Carney clocking up huge scores, probably an influx of youth into the team as well. So in many people's eyes, the two best teams, I suppose, in the West are in the final as well, which is always a good thing for a board, if you like, in terms of, I was going to say in terms of the coffers financially or for a crowd, but obviously that's ruled out this year. But I'd imagine the streaming services that will be provided, and that will be very, very well kind of received and well accounted for in terms of numbers. So very hard to call, having not seen it. Ballyduff on the fact that they've played senior over a number of years, probably people's favourites in terms of the outside perspective. But just have a sneak and for Clashmore to do well, and hoping that Tig and Mikey Carney can maintain their form and take it into the winter, please God.
Moving to the east then, Ballyduff Lower and Dunhill. That's on at 5:30 in Welsh Park on Sunday.
Yeah, again, real interesting in that last year I think Ballyduff and Dunhill probably played arguably one of the best games of hurling I've ever seen in Welsh Park last year. Really, really brilliant game of hurling. And it actually set the scene. I think they drew each other in the first round of the championship this year as well. And Ballyduff were kind of comprehensive winners. I'm actually living right in the middle of the two parishes. I'm living in Carrickphilip there, so the post address is Kill, but I'm a mile and a half from Ballyduff, and I'm 2 miles or so, or 2.5 miles from Dunhill. So it'll be interesting. I actually passed down the Ballyduff Hill this morning. I saw a red and white flag outside the Harrington household. So they're probably, I think they're really geared up well for this. Obviously, Calum Lyons is at the centre of everything they're doing. Jack Lyons, the Dunphys, and Jack Hendy, who played with Deise for a year or two, is back playing with Ballyduff. So it's they seem to be really, really strong. And from a motivational point of view, having been beaten by Dunhill in the earlier rounds this year and having been beaten by them in a classic last year, motivationally, probably the advantage is with Ballyduff in terms of how you go about something. Dunhill met the Ballygunner intermediate juggernaut last year, but were many people's kind of favourites for the intermediate last year. Loads of really good players, Shane Casey, Tomas Casey, Eamon Murphy, a really, really good team in terms of how they go about their business as well. And Jamie Sage, who played with Deise for a couple of years, now playing with Dunhill as well. So really, really interesting team, and they've come through a tough group as well. Tough. I think I'm right in saying that. I think Port Law were leading them into the last couple of minutes, and Dunhill got a goal near the end in the semi-final last week. So it'll be interesting. Very hard to call, not knowing enough about the kind of the teams, but from a motivational point of view, I suppose, from the the fact that the average is, it'll be the third time if Dunhill are to win, it'll be the third time that they'll be after beating Ballyduff in the last 3 years. And obviously I haven't mentioned the fact that the injection of players from the Bunman, Micheál Harneys, etc., into the Dunhill has obviously made them stronger. But sometimes that doesn't always kind of materialise when it comes to a final situation. But it makes for a classic, and I think that's been streamed as well from the Eastern Board. I think it's been streamed, so at least we'll be able to see it. Right,
we'll go for your winners and losers. We'll start from the top and work our way to the bottom. Saturday at 6:30, Lismore and Ballygunner. What way are you picking?
Yeah, I think Ballygunner will win that game.
Ballygunner. You're putting a fiver on this now, so I hope you're right.
You won't get much back for your fiver if you put it on Ballygunner.
Mount Sion and Passage.
Yeah, I think Mount Sion will win that game, and again, I think it'll be tighter than people expect, but I'd expect Mount Sion to win.
Mount Sion Passage final, okay. Clashmore and Ballyduff Upper.
Yeah, I think Clashmore will win. I think the disappointment of losing to Clonea in a county final of 2 years ago, and I think that's kind of propelling them forward. And I think Clashmore will win, but again, most people would probably suggest that Ballyduff will win based on their senior role over the last number of years.
Ballyduff Lower and Dunhill.
Yeah, it's definitely the hardest to call, not just from a knowledge point of view, but it's from perspective of not knowing. I'll go with Ballyduff because I'm closer to Ballyduff in terms of the parish, I suppose. But I think motivationally, I've referenced it already, the fact that it's their third time playing it. I'll go with the old adage of third time lucky.
Really quick then, we'll go to the junior ones, right? Just win-loss. 4 Mile and Ballyduff Upper. Junior B. Yeah,
I don't know enough about it, but I'll presume that every ounce of Ballyduff Upper's being is going into their intermediate team. So I'll go with 4 Mile Whitewater to have more of a backdrop of players that perhaps have retired from senior that are playing with them now.
Clonea Mount Sion.
Yeah, I'll go with Clonea beat Deise, and I haven't seen much of it on Mount Sion. I'll go with Clonea, having gone with Mount Sion against Passage in the junior, but again, wouldn't know enough about it.
Tramore and Roanmore in the junior A.
Yeah, I'll go with Tramore because of and again, not knowing about it, but knowing how forceful Tramore have been in the last number of years in terms of what they're trying to do in GAA circles out there, led by a great man in Tom Cullen. So I know how hard they're working out there, and maybe their need is greater than a team that already has a senior team.
Kilgoblet and Mellery.
Okay, and I'd be completely blinded to knowing anything significant about it, but I'll take a blind guess on Kilgoblet.
Okay. All I'll say is now, a blind guess from you is worth a lot more than a blind guess from me.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Colligan and Turin. Now, mind you, be careful now. If Gavin Whelan here, someone talk about Colligan.
Yeah, look, without incurring the wrath of anybody, I've been reading a bit about this. I've been reading. You just keep an eye on how Colin is going for Colligan. Colin Dunford, I know he's going really well. And then I read that both Shane and Dara are going really well for Turin. Dara scoring heavily, and I was asking someone, is he playing, because he was scoring, I think he scored 13 points in the last match, is he playing midfield or centre forward, or was he switched up there during the match? So I'll take a punt on Turin. Maybe their need is a little bit greater, but I'm sure I'll hear from Dunford and Gavin in that respect.
Yeah, Gavin will text me now in the next 5 minutes. And Ferrybank and Tramore, last one, Junior C.
Yeah, again, I'll go with Ferrybank on the likelihood that they're everything that Tramore have in terms of not quality, but in terms of their resources are being pooled into the junior A team, and I'll go with the fact that maybe Ferrybank, given an intermediate team, may have more reserves there in terms of their approach to the junior. That's
that. It'll be a good weekend, hopefully.
Yeah, it's going to be very enjoyable, and I think it's on the back of the GA having a bit of a kind of a setback on the back of the government announcement. So it's that makes it a little bit more difficult. Even at juvenile level, my own son is involved in under 15 against Ballygunner on Friday night, and you're just not sure about whether you're allowed to watch it or not. Yeah. But I'd imagine between our interview here and even the weekend's games, if you like, there may be some clarity on or a little bit more clarity around the approach for parents involved with their sons, etc. at games.
Derek, thanks a million.
Not a bother, Nigel. Mind yourself.
WLR, Imro Local Station of the Year.